Okay, so we're ready to create the shader for this and attach that shader to a material and then attach that material to this laser and we'll get that wavy laser effect going on that you saw at the start of the first video. So first thing we're going to want to do is open up Amplify Shader. And again, like I said before, if you don't have Amplify Shader, you can and it won't, I don't think it'll be a problem if you use Unity's shader graph. Try it out. Most of the nodes are very translatable, and you should be able to figure it out. The idea is the same. What I'm trying to teach you is the idea, not the technicalities around it. So use the shader graph and see if you can replicate it. So we're going to open a new canvas with Amplify Shader, and it opened up my other monitor, so I'm just going to drag it over here. I'm just going to put it down here. Uh, so as you can see, the first thing that we get is a output. This is our output. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is hit this little button up here, and we're going to save the shader somewhere. So I'm going to save it under my shaders folder. I'm going to say Wavy Laser Shader. That's what it's going to be called. And I'll just wait till it saves. It's a pretty big project I have running right now, so it takes a little longer to save things. We're going to. I always put my shaders in a folder for when I actually want to browse to them. So I'm just going to call it bitcutter/wavy laser and hit save. So now we have our shader. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to create a material. I'm just going to create it in the main directory here. So create material, and we're creating this material. Let's call it wavy laser. What that's going to allow us to do, well, first of all, I'm going to attach it, to my object here. And then within that material, we're going to select which shader to use. And we already saved the shader. It doesn't do anything yet, but we saved it. So we're going to be able to find it right here under Bit Cutter, Wavy Laser. And you'll see it just starts as black, but that's fine. So the next thing I usually do uh, is I close this Amplify window, and I'll show you why. So see this icon right here? It means we're editing the base shader itself, which is all fine and good. Um, but what I like to do is when you go to this material, you get this open in shader editor, and it opens another Amplify Shader window. And you can see the icons change. And what this means is we're editing not only the shader, but we're also editing the material itself, and we're going to see those materials reflected in the scene as we change them and as we save it. The nice thing about this is if you ever have properties for the shader, which we are going to have, properties are things that you can see in the inspector and change at any time. So things like color, speeds of whatever, and you can set almost anything up as a property. We're going to set up some properties, and that way when we change them in the shader editor here, we're going to see them reflect in real time right on this material, which is pretty cool. So for this material, and for the shader, I should say, there's a few things we don't want. Well, actually, there's only really one thing we do want, and that's emission. This isn't going to be a shader that reflects light. It's not going to give off light, and anything like that. It's just going to have emission. That's it. Unlit. So we're going to leave this as surface, but under light model, we're going to say unlit. And that changes the output to only take in emission. And it also only takes in, not only takes in local emission, but there's also some other things that it can still take, like vertex offset, which is exactly what we want to do with this shader. So the first thing we're going to do is add some color to it. So just hit space, type in color. We're going to grab a color. We're going to say, I don't know, let's make it like purple, kind of like the one I have in the little darker purple there. Okay, and you'll see that if I grab this RGBA, put it into emission and hit save, boom, shader turns to purple. Just like that, we're done. No, just kidding. We got lots to do. So the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get that kind of glow effect happening. And the way I was doing it before is anything in the middle of our wavy laser is kind of more white, and anything towards the edge is more more like the color of the laser, so purple in this case. So we're going to make another color here. I'm going to say white. And then we're going to lerp that. Okay, so we're going to RGBA A to B, and actually the way this works is we want to switch these around. Let's put white in as A and purple in as B. That way, you know, towards the inside, just because of the way that we're going to be doing the what's called Fresnel effect, is the inside of it will be white and the outside of it will be purple. And I mean, that's something that you can just change at any time. So if you mess that up, whatever, it's really easy to mess around with it and put it in correctly. The second thing we're going to want to do is this first color here, or the purple color, is we want that to be editable in the inspector. So we're going to change it to a property. And we're just going to call it color, not color zero. Color zero sounds weird. And let's save. And you'll see that this is all white. Don't worry, we're going to change that right away. But you will see that if I click now, I can change the color right in the inspector. Super, super handy. So for the lerp, we need an alpha. That's why it's all white right now. As soon as we put in an alpha, it's going to take basically a 0 to 1 value, and it's going to go from 0, which is white, to 1, which is purple. So to do that, we're going to use what's called a Fresnel effect. You can see what a Fresnel effect does. You can click the little preview button. So we're just going to put the out into alpha. And if we save right now, we can see that it's really hard to see, but there is a tiny, tiny little bit of purple right there. So what we want to do is we want to get that a little different. So let's just fool around with some examples here. So let's bring the scale up a bit. Let's put the power maybe down a bit. Let's see what that looks like. That's a little better. And we can fool with this as much as we want. The dangerous part about shaders is how much you have to fool with them to get exactly what you need. It's tricky. So the bias I actually want to be about 0.2. I'm just going to leave that, and scale, bring down the scale a bit, and the power. Yeah, that looks not exactly what I want, but it's getting there. That looks a little better. And you can see as we view it from a different angle, get a little bit of a different effect. So we'll go with that for now. We can change this up a little bit later. So that was really easy. The second thing we need to do, just move these out of the way a bit, is we need to get the vertex displacement going, or the vertex offsetting, sorry. And we're going to do that by using a noise map. I've created a whole bunch of noise maps in Substance Designer, and you can just, I'm sure you can Google it and just get a square image, you know, 1024 by 1024. For this purpose, probably just a 256 by 256 is more than enough. And what we're going to do is we're going to pan that image so it just constantly rotates, and then we're going to apply that image to the vertex offset using the world normals. And what that's going to do is as the 0 to 1 values of the black and white image hit those vertices are going to go up and down, up and down, up and down, depending on the value that hits them. And that is going to create our kind of wobbly, wavy effect. So first thing we need is an image. And texture, better word. So we can use either a texture sample or a texture object. I'll use a texture object because it's more the way that the Unity graph does it. So we need a texture object, but we also need a texture sample. And then we put that texture object into the sample. And then we select what texture we want to use. So I have some kind of set up here. I'm going to use this pattern bubbly. And as you can see, you know, there's lots of black and whites in there. And we're going to use that to kind of bump and like wiggle the vertices. So I can do this right now. And so we're going to say world normal. So that's going to give us the world normal information of every single vertex. We're going to multiply that by this map. Whenever I'm using black and white maps, I use the R channel. It just gives you the most accurate data. And then I'm going to multiply this. And let's see what happens when I plug this into vertex offset right now. Hit apply. So that's ridiculous. That's not exactly what we want. It's pretty cool, but it's not what we want. But you can imagine the kind of stuff you could use this for, just with these, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 nodes. So awesome, so powerful. We want some kind of way to choose the power of the offset. So we want a float, okay? And we want to plug this in to the multiply as well. And we're going to call this, well, first of all, we're going to make this float a property so we can edit it in the inspector. And we're going to call it Vertex, I don't know, let's call it Vertex power. Hit apply. So it went down to 0 because this is at 0 right now. But if I go to 2, see how it changes in real time? So let's go 0.02, or sorry, I have it on 0.2. Let's go 0.02. Let's go 0.03. That's a little closer to what I have because we're also going to be moving these waves, remember. So you don't want it to look too ridiculous. But I mean, that's up to you. You can do whatever you want. So to do that, super, super simple. All we're going to do is we're going to create so type in UV and you get this texture coordinates. Okay, that's just the UV map of our texture. It's just a 0 to 1 map, basically. And then with that, what we're going to do is we're going to add a panner, and that's going to pan this UV map. Okay, put it into a panner, and then we're going to plug this into the texture. Now, nothing's going to happen yet, but if we clicked on this panner and we set the speed of, let's see, set the speed of the X, because remember, our UV map goes from left to right, and that's Maya, right? Left to right, start, end, or ends, or start, end, whatever way you want to look at it. And so let's put this up to 0.4. And this starts panning automatically. And if we hit refresh, oh, that's kind of cool. It's panning, it's working. We got a little bit more work to do though. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to set up a speed that we can change in the inspector. So we need 2 floats, one for the X and one for the Y. Easy peasy. So we're going to call this property. We're going to call this speed X. I'm going to change this to a property. Oops. We're going to call it speed Y. And then we're going to append these. So what appending does is it takes 2 floats and it makes them into a vector. And that can be a vector 2, vector 3, vector 4, whatever. We're going to go with a vector 2 because we just need the X and the Y. And plug them in like this and plug them into the speed. So now, take a look at our inspector, right? So now we have 2 speeds and we have a vertex power. So let's put this at 1, and then let's give it some Y speed too. That way, as it's going across, the waves are going across, they're also turning around it, right? So you get this kind of cool effect. And the nice thing about that is it gets a lot less repetitive because as you can see, we got this bigger wave that we keep seeing and it's repetitive, right? It's always the same. But if we take this and we say 0.2, all of a sudden the repetitiveness is gone, just like that. Pretty cool. All right, so we've got that, we've got this. That's all good. Now there's one other thing I want to show you, and this goes back to the UV editing a little bit. If we go to the back, check this out. We've got a seam here, and that's because those vertices aren't lined up in the UV map. We can spend some more time in the UV map doing that, or what we can do is we can taper off the waves at the end, at both ends, because this end has the same problem. See that seam right there? We don't want that. For my purpose, and for the purpose of the tutorial, I'm going to show you how to taper off those edges using the shader, and that way you won't see those seams. But if you don't want that tapering, you'll have to go back to the UV editing and figure out a good way to do that. And I mean, there's ways. I'm just not going to get into it right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to set off a taper. So we need another texture coordinate. And we're going to take the V or sorry, we're going to take the U because the U is vertical, or fuck, the U is horizontal. Okay, and we're going to remap it. So U, we're going to plug that into value. We're going to remap it to, well, here, let's see a preview first. So this is what it looks like right now. We're going to go from 0 to 1 to, let's say, minus 10 to 1. What that does is that gives us this big space right here where nothing's happening, and then right here it's kind of tapering off. The other way we can do this is actually by going 0 and 10, and that's, it's actually probably a smarter way to do it, and I don't know why I didn't do this in my original project, but I should have. So let's do that, and let's duplicate this, and we're going to go 0 to 10 as well here, but on this one we're going to go 1 to 0. Okay, we're going to plug this in. That's just going to make it do the same thing on the other side. So it's tough to see. You have to kind of look closely, but there's a black line here and a black line here that kind of fades out. It's a gradient line. What we're going to do is we're going to multiply. Oops. We're going to multiply these together, but first we have to clamp them, because we always want black and white to go from 0 to 1. Well, not always, but in this case we do. And right now it's going from 0 to 10, and we don't want that. We want it to go 0 to 1. So we're just going to clamp it and see how it looks the same. Because when you're talking black to white, 0 to 1 is as far as you can go. As soon as you go past 1, it's still white, right? You're not going to notice a difference. So, but in calculations, you do notice a difference. And farther down the line, if we don't clamp these, we're going to run into problems. So now we got this thing that looks like this. It's basically a big beam with two fade-off gradients in the back. And really, really simple. All we're going to do is multiply these together. So we're going to multiply. We're going to bring this R in here. We're going to bring this gradient wave and check that out. So it's perfectly fine in the middle, and on the edges it fades right out. And instead of throwing this one into the multiply for the vertex offset, we're going to send this one into the multiply for the vertex offset. And now if we refresh, we'll see it tapers off a little bit, but you can hardly notice. But look, no more seams. Pretty cool. And that's it. That was easy. So yeah, make sure to check out my tutorials in the future. And yeah, I hope this works for you. If it doesn't, leave questions in the comments. Totally okay with that. Yeah, feel free to message me on YouTube or do whatever you need to do. I like to try to help people out. This is why I'm doing this. I just really want people to learn and use this knowledge in a good way and make something really cool. So hopefully this gives you a base knowledge to do something cool with shaders and UV mapping.